So I have Work Together 7-1 turned on in Applia. Now, Chapter 7 is actually going through and having us create permanent financial statements. So we went through in Chapter 6 and we learned how to do a worksheet. A worksheet is not a permanent financial statement. A worksheet truly is something that we go through and complete in order for us to know that our books are good to go so we can actually create a permanent financial statement. Now, when I talk about a permanent financial statement, I'm talking about if I were to go ahead and decide I wanted to invest in Pepsi, I wanted to buy stock in Pepsi. One of the things you can do as an investor on a publicly traded company is you can look at their financial statements. In their financial statements, one of the statements that are going to be produced and will be produced by every company is going to be called an income statement. And an income statement truly is going to show how much money that business is making. And all businesses do that because they are standard types of documents that allow you to look at Pepsi compared to Coke, compared to Apple, compared to Samsung, for example. So the worksheet is not a permanent financial statement, but is what we do to know that we are ready to go through and complete the rest of our financial statements. When we look at our directions for Work Together 7-1, it tells us that a partial worksheet from Darlene's Delivery Service for the month ended July 31st is given below. Also is a blank form for completing an income statement, and I'm going to guide you through the following example. It says, prepare an income statement for the month ended July 31st of the current year. Calculate and record the component percentages for total expenses and net income, and round the calculations to the nearest 0.1%. So a couple things that I am noticing when I look here is they only gave us a partial section of a worksheet, and the only section that they gave us, notice, is lines 11 down dealing with sales and then our totals to the bottom, because the rest of the information on a worksheet I don't need to look at. But we know based on our worksheet that we already have a net income, and I have a net income of $3,330 because it tells me that right here. An income statement is always going to be revenue minus expenses. And that's going to tell us whether or not we made money or lost money. When we get into merchandising businesses, it'll get a little bit trickier because we have some cost accounting that we have to do. But with our nice, easy service business organized as a sole proprietorship, we just have to deal with revenue and expenses. So when we look at an income statement, I like you to take a look at and be able to identify that this is an income statement compared to other ones, because this very last column right here says percent of sales. Okay? That is always going to be your clue that that is going to be your income statement column, because on your test you're going to have two different blank financial statements that you're going to need to complete, and you're going to need to know which one is for an income statement and which one is for the balance sheet, which we'll be learning later. The other thing that I want to point out is notice that this section right here, right above work and fill in the lines, a lot of people think they should start typing here, but you shouldn't. I know that we can't right now, but when I physically give you a piece of paper, a lot of people write here. But there's no spot for numbers, so this is more of our heading section here. All financial statements start with our blank 3 lines at the very top, which is the name of our business, the name of our document, and the date. Now, we were told that the name of our business is Darlene's Delivery Service, and we're also told that we're preparing an income statement, so I can fill in the top 2 things for that. Now the date. Income statements are always prepared for the fiscal period. A fiscal period is the length of time that the business decides whether or not they have made money or lost money. We will never have we would never determine our net income on Monday and then our net income on Tuesday. It just doesn't work out that way. We always cover it for a length of time. And our direction says that we're doing it for the month ended of July 31st of the current year. Now there are two sections that we put on an income statement: revenue and expenses. And what you're going to find on our financial statements is we are going to be using our account heading classifications and putting them on there. So the very first thing I'm going to put right here on my income statement is going to be the word revenue. And it's going to be followed by a colon, because that makes it stand out as a heading, And I do not expect to put any numbers after it because revenue is a classification, not an account title. So then what I would do is I would list all of my revenue accounts. How many revenue accounts do I have? Revenue? 5? 1. I have 1 revenue account, right? Now, you are going to have an example in this chapter where you're going to have multiple revenue accounts. So, for example, let's say that a business that provides a service, we do lawn care. He tracks his revenue for lawn care and he tracks his revenue for snow shoveling to keep separate because he wants to know what's going on. If you have multiple revenue accounts, you would list sales, lawn mowing, sales, shoveling, and then you would add the 2 together to get a total revenue. But we don't have one for Darlene because Darlene just has 1 account called sales. So below the word revenue, I'm going to put in the word sales, and then you will notice I'm having issues getting my account sales in here. That there are 2 columns for numbers. There is not a debit and credit column here. Okay? What we're going to look at on our income statement is on the left column here would be individual amounts, and then on the right-hand side is going to be totals. So, for sales, do we have multiple sales accounts right now? There's just 1, right, for Darlene? So our number is going to go on the right side because it's already a total. I don't need to go through and put in total anything because it's already going to be there. So I'm going to put my amount for sales, which is $5,511, in the right column, which is not credit. Don't worry about that column that says percent of sales. We are going to do that later. Now, am I all done with my revenue accounts? My other classification that goes on an income statement is what? Expenses. So I put that heading on there, followed by a colon. Nothing goes in the amount column because this is just my account heading classification. Now I go through and list all of my expenses. I have advertising expense, and we have individual amounts for our expenses, so I'm going to put the amount of advertising in the left column. So I'm going to put $821. Then I'm going to do insurance expense for $300. Miscellaneous expense for $347. Supplies expense for $713. The other thing that I want to point out is what columns that they gave us in the direction. They did not give us the trial balance. They gave us just the income statement and balance sheet columns of the worksheet because we have to get these numbers after our adjustments. If you were to go through and use the numbers on the trial balance, it would not account for our insurance and supplies expense. You will notice that below supplies expense, they already have the heading which says total expenses. So what I need to do, I have to add up 821, 300, 347, 713. That's a total, and that total will go in the right column for where it says total expenses. When I added it up, I got $2,181. Did anyone else get that? Okay. Now, when we look at what we have, again, left column is individual, right column is totals. I have on the very top here, I have my revenue of $5,511, and now I have my total expenses of $2,181. Am I going to add or subtract? Subtract. And am I going to have a net income or a net loss? I'm going to have a net income because my revenue is $5,500. My expenses is $2,000. My expenses are less than my revenue. So therefore, it's going to be a net income. How much is my net income? $3,330. So when you go through and do your math here, you need to use your calculator to make sure that you didn't put in the wrong number. But your net income on your income statement should equal the net income that you calculated on your worksheet. If it doesn't, somewhere you've made a mistake, either on your worksheet or on your income statement. But that's how you know whether or not you've done your work correctly. Now, the other thing that we have on our income statement is called our component percentages. And our component percentages allow us to go through and compare companies to see how well they're doing. So, for example, in town, we have that Packer Pizza sub shop. Would you agree? If I wanted to know how well they were doing, I could look at their income statement and see what their net income is. But I could also go through and compare that to Pizza Hut. But the numbers are going to be way different for Pizza Hut compared to Packer subs, right? Because the total volume of sales for Pizza Hut is going to be ginormously bigger. But are they selling similar products? Definitely. So what it does, by putting our component percentages on our income statement, it allows me to go through and take out the sheer volume of sales that Pizza Hut has, and I can look at that percentage to see whether or not that business is making smart decision making. So to calculate our percent of sales, we are going to do that for sales, total expenses, and net income. And now, I know it's shocking, but we're going to have to do some division. I know we've been adding, we've been doing some subtracting now. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of division. And so what we have to do is we take whatever number we need and we divide by sales. So the first component percentage I need is sales. So I'm going to take sales and divide by sales. So if I divide anything by itself, what's its answer? 1. But we have to switch this into a percent. So instead of 1, it would be 100. And I will tell you that all of your component percentages, your sales should always be 100%. And you need to have one decimal place that was given to you in the directions. Now, we have to go through and calculate my component percentage of total expenses. So, using my calculator, I would put in my calculator $2,181, and I would divide by $5,511. And then you will notice on my calculator, the number that comes up here is 0.3957. I need to round that. I have to switch it first to a decimal. To switch it to a decimal, I'm really going to take that decimal place, or not switch it to a decimal, switch it to a percentage. I have to move it 2 to the right. So I'm going to move this decimal place 2. So it would be 39.57, but I need one decimal place. Is this going to stay 39.5 or is it going to go 39.6? Why? Because it's rounding, and when I take a look at the number to the right, I need to have one decimal place. So the number to the right is greater than 5, so therefore it has to be rounded up. So my component percentage for my income statement is going to be 39.6. So what does that mean? For every dollar that this business spends, 39.6 cents of it covers their expenses. So now I have to do the same thing, but I'm going to go ahead and do that for my net income. I'm going to put in my calculator first my net income of $3,330, and then divide by 5,511, and then that's going to give me 0.6042. Move my decimal places 2 to the right, so it would be 60.4, and it would only be 60.4 because the number after is lower than there. And that is what an income statement looks like. You always go through and do your component percentages last because you need to have your net income done. And you will notice on our income statement here, there are double lines below net income. The double lines below net income means that our totals prove. The single lines that are drawn on here to show that we have done some sort of math. We add up our expenses to get my total expenses, and to calculate my net income or net loss, I'd always take my revenue and subtract my expenses. If I have a net loss, you're going to find that number is going to be in parentheses. A parentheses would always indicate that it would be a negative number or a net loss. So that is a heads up on that. So go ahead and try to complete the on your own.